For folks that this is their first time, this is really IEC's opportunity to showcase some of our priorities for this upcoming legislative session, as well as our partners that are leading the good work on clean water. So this year, our focus is going to be on PFAS, drinking water standards, and microfiber filter, or we're keeping microplastics out of our waterways. And we are joined by Andrea Densham and Patrick MacRoy. And we'll also be joined by Senator Mike Simmons from the Illinois 7th Senate District here in a little bit. But before we get into all that, I'm just going to share my screen, talk a little bit about IEC, and then also just some general housekeeping rules as we go through the rest of this evening. Sorry, 1 second. I think I'm having some technical difficulties. There we go. Folks can see this. Cool. So yeah, this is our 2024 Clean Water Town Hall. My name is Ayana Simba, and I am IEC's City Programs Director. For folks that may not see me as often, I work primarily our City of Chicago work, but also was previously our Water Policy Director, and still involved in a lot of city stuff, both at the state and the local level. A little bit about IEC. So we've been around since 1975, and our work is really to safeguard Illinois' people, plants, animals, and the natural systems that we all depend on. And we do this through building the people and building for the people and the environment. We represent over 100 environmental organizations across the state, and then 500 individuals. And then our mission is really to carry out public policies that protect the environment. And we do this through education, advocacy, and movement building. And what exactly does that look like? It can look like many things. It can be one like tonight, public education, letting people know who we are, what we do, and who our partners are. And then we also have different events throughout the year. So some people are familiar with our annual lobby days that we do downstate, or some things that we might do in Chicago around the city budget. And that's some of our more so some of our public education. And then we influence decision makers. So we make sure that we organize meetings so that our members can actually interact with their elected officials. And then sometimes we do lobby elected officials as well. And we mobilize people, we mobilize supporters, and then we also hold elected officials accountable. So every year we put out a state scorecard, and about every other year we do a Chicago City Council report card where we basically grade our elected officials based on how they vote for the environment. So in a nutshell, that's what IEC is, and that's what we do. And we are glad that you all are here with us today. So just really quickly, as far as an agenda, pretty short. We have a couple of speakers tonight, and then we'll have lots of time for Q&A. A couple of housekeeping rules. We will have Q&A at the end. So if you want to ask a question, please put it into the chat. Typical rules: if you're not speaking, keep yourself on mute. And if you need any type of assistance, again, just reach out to me in the chat during the presentations. So how we have it set up tonight is that we are going to have Illinois State Senator Mike Simmons speaking a little bit, and then we'll be followed by presentations from Patrick MacRoy and Andrea Densham. I'm going to see really quick if... Okay, great. Okay, great. We'll have the senator join here in a little bit. In the meantime, maybe do the panelists just want to give a quick introduction about yourselves?
Sure, I can do a quick introduction. My name is Patrick MacRoy. I'm the Vice President for Environmental Health and Water Programs at Elevate. For those that aren't familiar, Elevate is a nonprofit organization that works nationally but based in Chicago. And we work to create a just and equitable world that has clean and affordable heat, cooling, power, and most importantly for tonight, water in homes, prioritizing frontline communities as we do that.
Great. Sorry. And Andrea Densham, I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for the Alliance for the Great Lakes. As many of you know, the Great Alliance for the Great Lakes has been around for a number of decades and working very hard to protect the Great Lakes and our clean water across the region. So we work here in Illinois as well as our surrounding states, and also sometimes work binationally with our colleagues in Canada to make sure that that our binational treaties and our federal partners are ensuring that our drinking water is safe for all of us, and that the aquatic life in our region can live vibrant and healthy lives as well as the people. So with that, I'll stop and we'll pass it back to you.
Cool. So yeah, I'm super excited for you all's presentation soon. I see that we now have the senator here with us. I'm sure we'll give a little bit of a background, but I just want to say that Senator Mike Simmons has been a longtime environmental advocate. He represents the 7th District, the 7th Illinois Senate State District. And prior to being the state senator, he was the deputy director at My Brother's Keeper Alliance. That's an initiative with the Obama Center that seeks to break down barriers for opportunity for boys and young men of color, and just has a long background in being in the Lincoln Square and Uptown neighborhood, and is a Chicago native. And we are very honored for him to be here tonight. Again, a longtime environmental champion. And so I will pass the mic to you, Senator.
Thank you so much, Iana. How's everybody doing tonight? It's good to see you. It's Mike Simmons, State Senator for 7th District, far north side of Chicago. So those are the neighborhoods of Lincoln Square, which is where I was born and raised, Uptown, Edgewater, Rogers Park, Wrigleyville, Andersonville, Ravenswood, Budlong Woods, Arcadia Terrace, and North Center. And it is such a joy to be here with you this evening to talk about water issues. I'm going to go ahead and dive right in and just talk about some of the things that I've been able to work on in the 3 years that I've been serving in the Illinois Senate, and very excited to work on additional bills in the years ahead. First, let's just talk a little bit about just a few of the key environmental bills that have been passed into law recently that I've been very excited to champion in the Senate. So you all, I'm sure, no doubt are familiar with the Small Plastic Bottle Act. That was Senate Bill 2960. Very important legislation that requires hotels with 50 or more rooms to eliminate the use of small single-use plastic bottles containing personal care products in individual rooms and in public bathrooms beginning in July of 2025. By 2026, we know that all hotels with fewer than 50 rooms must make this transition. Was proud to throw down in the Senate and fight the good fight to get that bill moving and to get it passed. We've got more work to do on the issue of single-use plastics, as no doubt this group certainly knows. I was also happy to champion the Water Plan Task Force Act. This was Senate Bill 2743, which establishes a state water plan task force to identify critical water issues and their solutions in the state's water plan, and to publish an updated plan at least every 10 years, which would guide all of our executive departments in their actions, funding, and legislation around water issues in Illinois. Was very proud to champion that legislation as well. We've got a lot of work to do around implementation of the water plan, but just having the framework in place is so important. And I want to say thank you to the individual folks here that I know played really important behind the scenes work in terms of making that bill viable in the General Assembly. Also, I was proud to be a chief co-sponsor again on the Forest, Wetlands, and Prairies Grant Program. This is Senate Bill 2781. Really important legislation that gives us a grant program that sits within the Department of Natural Resources in Illinois to restore degraded lands and promote the growth of native vegetation and to help mitigate the impact of climate change. This is an important issue for sustainability, for natural environment and habitats. I am a big geek when it comes to native plants and restoration of the original vegetation of the state of Illinois in the Midwest. What a beautiful state this was before before it was industrialized. And I think that we can get to a point where the 90% or so of natural areas that we've lost can be reclaimed. And having legislation like this helps us to ensure that the resources are there to incrementally make that happen all across the state. And then finally, I want to quickly mention the Water Reuse Act. I was proud to co-sponsor that legislation as well. Came over from the House, allows the Illinois EPA to adopt rules to allow the reuse of treated effluent, which is sewage, and activities like irrigation and manufacturing. So these are all just sort of very important bills that environmental groups have worked on, and that I personally have been very proud to help to champion and get passed out of the General Assembly. Moving on, I want to talk quickly about a couple of other initiatives that I've personally been a sponsor for. The first is that in 2022, I was proud to secure $1 million in state funding for the replacement of lead pipes. In the northern section of the 7th District, we have some communities on the far north side of Chicago that are disinvested. Folks don't think of the far north side as areas that have disinvested communities, but they most certainly do. And when we're talking about replacing lead pipes and ensuring that people have access to safe, clean public drinking water, communities that I represent on the far north side of Chicago cannot be overlooked when it comes to that work. The lead pipes we know continue to pose threats to public health and our clean water supplies. And so I'm looking forward to continuing to advocate for a more rapid replacement for lead pipes, not just in the district I represent, but all across the state of Illinois. I also want to talk about Senate Bill 727. This is the Safe Public Drinking Water Act. And this is a bill that I brought forward in the spring that essentially would codify newly established maximum contaminant levels for 5 different types of per and polyfluoroalkyl alkaline. I'm probably mispronouncing that. I always do, even though I tried to master that pronunciation in the spring and failed miserably. But what we're talking about are forever chemicals. Forever chemicals that shortly after I introduced my bill in February, the federal EPA went ahead and codified similar maximum contaminant levels for the entire country. So they targeted, I believe it was 5 of those PFAS. And, my bill would require that the Illinois EPA sample for 1,4-dioxane by June 30th of 2026, and will establish a new state level MCL for that substance if they find the dioxane to have exceeded the federal standards in our public drinking water in the past. We also know from the Department of Public Health that 1,4-dioxane is most likely a carcinogen, which could cause cancer. Here's a quick important point about this. So the bill that I just discussed passed the Senate. It is in the House right now. We expected that bill will be called during the January lame duck session, which I'm really appreciative of. But we now have an incoming Trump administration, which you all know is hostile to a lot of these types of regulations that we're advocating for. So it makes this bill even more important. Senate Bill 727, that the House passes that bill in January. I've been in communication with Jen Walling on this bill, and I want to say thank you to Jen for just helping me to make sure that rank and file legislators understand the importance of this bill and this issue, and that we get ahead of the Trump administration and what undoubtedly will be them rolling back a number of bills and federal EPA rules that have been recently promulgated that would help us to have cleaner drinking water. There's also the issue of the future of Illinois' EPA and research and development. As I was developing Senate Bill 727, I wanted more toxic chemical compounds included in this legislation, but the Illinois EPA shared that their research and development is not at the point where they have the resources to test for all those chemicals that we like to cover. So following the passage of this bill, I am going to be looking at ways that we can expand R&D capabilities for Illinois' EPA across the board so that we can test and set limits for more harmful chemicals that may be infiltrating our public drinking water. So Senate Bill 727 is very important, but there's still going to be a lot more work to do in terms of state capacity around research and development so that we can get ahead of all the other potential infinite number of forever chemicals, PFAS, and contaminants that may be in our drinking water right now or could end up there in the future. And then finally, on the lighter note, just talk a little bit more parochially about the district. I am so I talked earlier about geeking out around just natural landscapes and restoration of prairies and river waterways and the such. I take great pride in representing a district that covers about 5 to 6 miles of the Lake Michigan shoreline, and also is adjacent to a significant stretch of the North Branch of the Chicago River. So I consider the water kind of like our constituency, right? I mean, the water. It predates the human species. It will be there long after we are here. We have to treat our water. We have to take care of our water. And to that in that vein, I'm proud every year to join Friends of the Chicago River to do river cleanups at River Park, which is actually just 3 blocks from where I grew up and where I learned to be a lifeguard. As you see, water is very important to me, and I look forward to continuing to do those cleanup days, working with organizations like the Edgewater Environmental Coalition to plant marm grass along the shoreline of Lake Michigan, which has a number of important benefits for our water systems as well. And thank you so much for having me here with you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you so much. As folks see, huge environmental champion and so many things, especially related to water. So thank you again for joining us. I know you're super busy, so you're welcome to stay. You're welcome to dip as well. That's totally fine.
Thank you so much. We are tag teaming a 46 Ward Town Hall and Public Safety at the moment. So I'm going to pop right over to, I'm actually at Truman College right now. But thank you so much. And if any of you have any questions, reach out to my office at senatormikesimmons@gmail.com, 1040 West Bryn Mawr. We're always open and available for our constituents. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. And with that, we can hop into our presentation. So Patrick, I have you going first.
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and share. You already know who I am. I'm also a proud constituent of Senator Simmons. I didn't mention that, but very excited to be in his district and very proud of the work he's been doing related to water. So hopefully you can see my screen and hear me all right.
Yeah, it's kind of sharing as the like presenter one, so we see the
Oh,
notes
I
and
did the wrong one. Okay.
stuff.
Let's see if we can make that right. How about screen? It should be that one. Is that better?
Yes, perfect.
All right, good. Okay, cool. So just real quick, the map that is on the title slide here shows an updated list of locations nationwide that have been identified with PFAS contamination. And I gave a similar presentation about a year ago with the map from August of 2023. And I didn't actually put the comparison on here, but the dots have exploded exponentially, which is really highlighting how concerning PFAS are as an issue and how much work we have to do on this. You can see there's quite a few dots there in Illinois. So there's a lot we need to do to work on this. But before I get into that, let me tell you a little bit about what PFAS are. So as the senator said, it stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. It's actually a large group of man-made chemicals. So we often talk about a couple specific members of the class, but in reality, it's a huge number, thousands, potentially even 10,000 different chemicals that are part of this group known as PFAS. And what really defines the group is that they have a carbon chain that are surrounded by fluorine atoms. And what's significant about that is that the carbon fluorine bond is one of the strongest in chemistry. So these chemicals are very persistent. They don't break down readily. So once they get into the environment and once they get into people or animals or plants even, they don't naturally deteriorate, right? They kind of just keep on persisting for long periods of time. And that is one of the challenges with this group of chemicals because as we're releasing them into the environment, they're just accumulating there and staying there. They don't break down like some other types of chemicals do. And then the other problem with PFAS is the more and more we're learning that they have toxic effects, that they harm our health. So I won't go into all of this. There's a lot of studies underway to better understand the harm of PFAS chemicals, but we have pretty good data to show that they're associated with certain types of cancer, including kidney and testicular cancer, and that they have particularly negative impacts on development, particularly development in the womb in terms of lower birth weights, evidence of delayed mammary gland development, and then also, perhaps most significantly, they've been shown to have an impact on the immune system. So we particularly know that fetuses and young children who are exposed to PFAS have a delayed or rather a reduced response to vaccines and presumably other immune system problems. So where are PFAS used? Surprisingly, a large number of places, right? So as I said, it's a group of thousands or even 10,000 different chemicals. They have that property of being resilient, hard to break down. They also tend to be both water and oil resistant. So they've been used in applications that are meant to resist water and grease. So that includes a lot of clothing. Until recently, it was virtually impossible to buy outerwear that was not treated with a PFAS chemical to resist the rain. They've been used in cookware. A famous example of one is Teflon. So Teflon pans are a PFAS. And they've been used in firefighting foams because they are very effective at suppressing grease and oil fires, particularly. But they've also been used in food packaging. So if you think of any sort of food packaging that's designed to prevent the greasy food from getting through the packaging, chances are that was a PFAS coating on that packaging. Many, many other types of uses. So, because of this widespread use, people have been exposed through many different pathways. It's in your food, it's in household dust. But really, if you want to get exposed to a lot of PFAS, having contaminated drinking water is the surest way to do that. So while we know, overall people are exposed a lot of ways, if you have contaminated water, you're quickly getting that as the largest source of your PFAS. And as the senator mentioned, the US EPA last April actually issued guidelines for how much of 6 different PFAS compounds can be in the drinking water. And these standards are actually pretty stringent. There's, some evidence that you could probably still be harmed at these levels, but they're much lower than almost all of the standards that were in place on a state or local level before the EPA rule. So these are pretty good, strong standards for the chemicals that are included. However, as I mentioned, there are thousands, if not 10,000 different PFAS compounds, and we now have regulations for this handful. The regulations require public water systems to test for these chemicals by 2027, and then they have to be in compliance with them by 2029. But as everyone knows, there's quite a bit happening at the federal level. New administration may not be as friendly to implementing those rules by the deadlines that I just mentioned. So what can we do about it? Well, first and foremost, states, including Illinois, can provide a backstop by creating a state version of those standards and require public drinking water systems in the state to comply with those federal maximum contaminant levels. And that will protect both against changes from the administration or potentially court challenges. But I would also suggest there's a lot more that we could do at the state level. So one of the biggest challenges that the EPA has not done a great job at yet is addressing the sources of PFAS and how do we actually prevent PFAS from getting into the environment and into our water in the first place. So many states, including Illinois, have already banned the use of PFAS in the firefighting foam. But there's more to be done with all those other uses. Food packaging has been a common ban. This is something that would be great to see in Illinois, along with bans on PFAS in other products, clothing, some of the furniture, toys, etc. Are all things we could do at the state level to actually stop PFAS from getting in and actually go beyond just the PFAS that EPA regulated with its April MCL. And I think the other thing that is worth noting about the PFAS rule, and one of the reasons why advocates were so excited to see that rule released this last April, is that it was actually the first time in almost 30 years that EPA proposed a regulation for a new set of chemicals in drinking water. So in the last 30 years, they tightened up a couple of standards, changed some numbers, but they hadn't actually added anything new. And that's really shocking if you follow the evolution of our knowledge about the harm of chemicals in our environment. So in the last 3 decades, we've learned a lot about how many different chemicals that we're exposed to in water or in other things in our environment can cause cancer, can cause developmental problems in children. And EPA hasn't done anything about any of those chemicals until the PFAS regulations. Sadly, with the change of administration, I think it's unlikely EPA is going to be doing any other new chemicals, at least in the next 4 years. I hope I'm wrong about that, but it seems unlikely, which means it's time for the states to step up and fill the gap. So that chart there, which is impossible to read and wouldn't want you to read anyway, is from a recent study published earlier this year that tried to look at regulated and unregulated chemicals in drinking water and prioritize the ones that are causing the most harm. And many of the unregulated ones are actually highest on the list for most likely to cause harm. So that includes things like 1,4-dioxane that the senator mentioned, as well as perchlorate, chromium-6, cyanotoxins, and then even the things we do regulate, we don't regulate very stringently. Things like arsenic, right? Arsenic, classic poison. Everyone knows it from murder mysteries, right? It's in our drinking water very commonly because it's naturally occurring in some geologic formations, right? It's an example of something that humans didn't necessarily add to the environment, but is actually naturally occurring. But it's still toxic, and our standards for it are way out of date. We know that the acceptable levels, quote unquote, acceptable levels of arsenic are likely to lead to cancer in the 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 10,000 sort of rates, if not more. Whereas we usually try to regulate chemicals at the 1 to 100,000 to 1 to million basis. I'm getting really nerdy and wonky. I'll back away from numbers a bit. But the point being, there's a lot of chemicals out there that we don't regulate at all nationally, and a lot that we regulate with outdated science that doesn't reflect what we know now about the harm. And there's an opportunity for Illinois to step in and create standards for these chemicals, create more stringent regulations, and do a better job of protecting our drinking water. So with that, I will turn it back to Ayanna.
Thank you, Patrick. I definitely have questions that I'll be adding to the chat, but I'll pass the baton to Andrew.
Fantastic. And I'm going to share my screen, so give me 1 second. This is a nice way for us to sort of continue a conversation and allow us to understand how all of these pieces are pulled together. So again, Andrea Densham, I'm with the Alliance for the Great Lakes. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor. And for those of us at the Alliance, it is critically important for us to keep drinking water and our lakes clean. One of the reasons why we care so much about plastics is because of our work at the Alliance for the Great Lakes, cleaning up the Great Lakes and doing that from the old industrial heavy metal challenges for many years. We worked really, really hard, the Alliance for the Great Lakes, along with many of our partners on the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. We were even able to insert $1 billion into the infrastructure bill in order to clean up all of that old industrial harm from the manufacturing that used to be here in the last century and the century before. Now we have new types of chemicals, and you just heard a really interesting and great overview of PFAS, which is again one subcomponent of some really dangerous chemicals. When we think about plastic, plastic is important because it's made out of petroleum plus chemicals. Sometimes those chemicals are things like PFAS or PFAS derivatives. For us, the Alliance has been doing work on cleanups for more than 20 years, and we've actually been part of community-based science work as we've done that. We've engaged the folks and our volunteers who have helped with cleanups, and we just in celebrating those 20 years of that work, we published a report this summer, and it shows that 86% of the litter collected is coming from plastic. We know from our colleagues at RIT that over 22 million pounds, we also think this is an underestimate, by the way, of plastics are in our Great Lakes. And the concentration of plastics in the Great Lakes is actually larger than what we often think of as the Great Garbage Patch. And so, I think it's important for us to think about how we can prevent the pollution from getting there in the first place, which is why I bring up GLRI, because our hope is to do work to keep our lakes and drinking water clean. So, as you all know, and many of you know this already, that the Great Lakes are a source of drinking water for 40 million people. Plastics impact more than 1,300 marine and freshwater species in our region. By the way, the Great Lakes interface with the oceans at the St. Lawrence. While that's far away from Illinois, all of our lakes are connected, and it's important to understand how there's a relationship between marine and freshwater species and freshwater and ocean issues as well. Plastics found in our drinking water, and it impacts human health. And it's on the top 10 most common found items that we see in our cleanups. And because it is both petroleum and petrochemicals, it also has a really negative impact on climate, and it is actually fueling part of the climate crisis. Just really quickly, and I'm not going to stay on this too long because Patrick did a really wonderful job, but there's been a really fantastic and important effort to highlight with high quality science the impact of plastics in public health. I worked on in public health for more than 20 years, and the great work that's happening on issues of public health and plastics is really, really important. I think also to note what we can anticipate is that NIH and the National Academy for Sciences probably won't be doing more additional research in the coming years on this topic, but private researchers like the Madero-Monaco Commission are going to continue to do this work. And in fact, just so you know, right now, folks are in the process of working on an international treaty. Obviously, there are challenges with that in terms of our federal administration, but people are not going to stop working really hard. We know that there are more than 10,000 chemicals in plastics, and some of them, as noted by Patrick, are carcinogens, neotoxins, and endocrine disruptors. And the other thing that's, I think, really important for us to think about is that we both manufacture plastics here in Illinois and the Great Lakes region, and some of those plastics end up in our drinking water, which I'm going to get to in just one quick second. But just to remind folks that there is a cost to the kind of health conditions that Patrick just talked about, and that can be caused by these kind of microplastics getting into our drinking water in particular. And in fact, just recently, our colleagues at NYU did an estimation of public health costs. So the cost for Medicaid, Medicare, and the other public facing healthcare systems, and they estimated it to be $250 billion in 2018. These were older numbers just because of the analysis, but it really gets to the point of that impacting and increasing the prevalence of obesity, heart disease, and other reproductive health issues, as well as cancers, really can have a cost on our public health system as well. So preventing it is really, really important. Obviously, prevention is the way to go. And lastly, on this side, there also was a really important report from UNEP. I've worked really closely with colleagues at Monterey Bay Aquarium who have worked with our colleagues at UNEP on this report. I think it's really an important thing to understand that many of these chemicals that are part of plastics can have a really damaging impact if they get in our drinking water. So what can we do? Well, one solution is to pass a bill like Patrick and the representative we're talking about, to make sure that we're not having PFAS in our drinking water. I think that's an important first step, and we're fully in support of that. The other way is to prevent the plastic itself from getting into our drinking water and our wastewater streams. So one pretty forthright solution is to prevent it through our laundry. We know that a single load of laundry can release 18 million plastic microfibers. And while some of our clothes, like the sweater I'm wearing, which is old, is mostly made of wool, most of the other things, like this jacket, this shirt, probably has microfibers that are plastic components into it. In fact, much of what the fibers that are and the fabrics that are made right now, whether they're for your sheets or clothes you wear, actually have plastic microfibers. And when they go out of our laundry and out of our washing machine, they find their way into our lakes and our oceans. They actually find their way into land and farm fields when it becomes part of some of the wastewater components, and into our rivers and streams. And clearly in the Great Lakes, it matters a lot to us because the lake is the source of our drinking water. So every year, about 6.5 million tons of microfibers are released globally into it. That's an equivalent of 32 billion t-shirts entering the environment. So what we want to do is to move forward and come up with a solution where we prevent that from finding its way into the drinking water, reducing the cost and of the cleanup on the end side, which here in Chicago, MWRD would be the group that's trying to clean it up after it gets out there in the drinking water. If we can prevent it from getting there, it's actually more cost efficient. So installing a washing filter is one really efficient way. This is really similar to how our dryers currently work, where we have a filter in there that filters out the subcomponents that come out as a product of dryers. This would be a similar sort of filter that would stop those plastic microfibers from making their way into our wastewater stream. Studies have found that those built-in filters can catch up to 87% of microfibers from making their way into wastewater. So it's a really efficient way to do this work. And the bills that we've been looking at would both incentivize manufacturing, so advancing sustainable manufacturing here in the state of Illinois, as well as incentivizing consumers to purchase washing machines that make those products. And again, we're unique in this part of the country because we make things, so we can start making more sustainable things just as we've moved forward towards a just transition away from fuel-based economy and towards renewable energy. We should also be moving that way in terms of sustainable manufacturing, away from highly pollutant manufacturing that uses toxins like PFAS, to creating things like washing machine filters that can prevent those kind of plastic microfibers from making their way into our wastewater stream. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to everyone, and we can answer some questions. But last thing I just want to say is that it is critically important for us to keep our Great Lakes, our rivers and streams healthy, not just for the aquatic life that lives there, but for us and our grandkids and the grandkids coming forward. Last thing we want is to have to be finding another $1 billion to clean up another mess like we had in the past. So with that, I'll stop sharing and pass it along.
Cool. Thank you both for the amazing presentation. I feel like I do this every year, but I still feel like I learned stuff, and I've learned a lot. I saw Joy had a question if we'll have access, so we can share out the slides afterwards. Patrick and Andrea, are you both comfortable with your slides being shared out? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Joy, we'll send a follow-up with the recording of this along with the slides. I see, Nicole, that your hand is raised. Also, folks, feel free to raise your hand. You don't have to put it in the chat. If you want to raise your hand, that's fine.
Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. And thank you to the panel. I have a question for Andrea. I understand we all want to shut down the fossil fuel plants. That's great. But then let me just play the devil's advocate a little bit. There are some plastics that are going to be necessary. So, for example, IV bags, things that are used in hospitals that are, I guess, quote unquote, what you call necessary. So there's going to be a need for, I guess, or let me just ask the question, won't there be a need for at least some fossil fuel plants to stay open to even make those necessary plastics? You see what I'm saying? How do we kind of like reconcile that with what we're trying to do overall in terms of shutting down fossil fuel plants and decarbonizing um, um, Illinois or the world?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's important for us to think about what is the pieces that we can do now, and how do we move forward. I often, I think this is probably because of my old public health background, I think about this in terms of harm reduction, and both of the bills that we're looking at here addressing the harms of PFAS and a microfiber bill around plastic microfibers and making sure washing machines have filters are two preventative ways for us to ensure that we're not causing additional harms. The medical use of plastics is something that's really interesting. We're actually going to be doing a seminar with Rush on that very issue in the coming weeks. And I think it's really important. One of the things that's most important for them, by the way, and I don't want to go down this too far, but transparency is one of the issues that all of the surgeons and the folks who work in the medical field would like to have more of. That is, knowing what's the subcomponents of the materials that are being used for people in interfacing. However, right now with the two bills that we're talking here, they're actually really, I think, pretty entry level and can really move us forward in trying to prevent that harm and do some risk reduction without completely changing the way in which manufacturing or the systems work in our state. And I'll stop there just to say that, we really think, and we've seen these microfilters work in EU and in the Southeast Asian marketplaces. So, the world kind of is separated by big markets, and the EU and in Asia both have these kind of filters. So we know it's possible. We just need to start building them in the United States or in North America and be able to protect our wastewater and drinking water.
Thank you.
Deborah Stone, I saw you had your hand raised. I do have a question, but I don't know if I wanted to come back to you. Or maybe she had to, okay, maybe she had to hop. But I had a question, Patrick, as far as they said that you said there's thousands and maybe even tens of thousands of PFAS chemicals. So why have government selected these specific ones to focus on? Like, is it just that they are the most prevalent or that they show up the most, or?
That, and it was easiest, to be the honest answer. So these chemicals are most of the ones they select are the most well-known, well-studied. There's the largest body of research to show what their health impacts are. There's traditionally been a reluctance at the EPA to regulate chemicals on a class basis. Traditionally, U.S. chemical policy has treated chemicals as innocent until proven guilty. And because of the way our policies are set up, we tend to give a lot of deference to industry, the companies that make the chemicals, and require very high levels of proof of harm before we take regulatory action. So the chemicals EPA took action on with this have the most robust literature showing they're harmful. That doesn't necessarily mean they are the most harmful and the other ones are safe. It means that these are the ones that have been researched. These are the ones for which there are easy access to testing methodologies and standards to be able to even do research on them. So it's both true that these are the most well measured and prevalent, but it's also just sort of a sign of the particular way in which the US regulates chemicals. There's been efforts to move towards a more class-based approach and to try to get more assurance that chemicals are safe rather than having to prove them harmful. And we're seeing that happen with PFAS, both internationally. The European Union has moved towards a class-based definition of PFAS and regulations to try to treat them as a class. And we're seeing that on the state level in the US a little bit. Maine passed a law a couple of years ago now that requires PFAS as a class to be prohibited from consumer products in 2020, I'm sorry, in 2030. That implementation is going to get delayed a bit, and there are exceptions to Nicole's point about essential uses and things for which we don't have good substitutes but are necessary for health and safety. So it's a complicated answer and a long background of policy, but there's certainly a lot of room to address PFAS beyond the ones that EPA regulated.
And just to add to that really quick, if you don't mind, Patrick, like, so the EU work and is developing some new frameworks. Part of the reason why I wanted to highlight the UNEP study from last year is because there's a really robust effort right now to be able to identify and link those chemicals that often are used in plastic, but other components and other elements, those sort of petrochemical like pieces and what the health harms are. It is serious science work, and it takes resources to do that. In my old days, when I was doing work in the health world, we were similarly trying to take some EU work here to the United States around pharmaceuticals, because we look at the harm, we do some pre-work, but then people begin to take the pharmaceuticals, but we don't continue testing afterwards. There's sort of similar corollary here, where we're saying you have to prove to almost an nth degree that this one chemical is doing this harm and it's this cause, and here's the causal chain, which is very complicated in the public health space. But our colleagues who understand the interface between these things have been moving towards a class-based system, and I think that's really important. And I say all that to say that I think we have a long way to go here, but researchers also have a really important role to play. And in the Great Lakes region, which we're really lucky to be in, we have colleagues on both sides of the border that are doing that work. And I think it's going to be really important for, as we move forward, to try to keep that information in front of our legislature in Illinois, and to keep this dialogue going. But first, it would be great to pass this bill this year, and both of our bills this year, and then to continue that work.
Do folks have any questions? Okay, I have one more just for Andrea. You mentioned, there's an easy way to just like have an attachment attached to the washer machine. As consumers, is there a way for us to buy those attachments already now? Are they relatively affordable for the average person to just buy and install in their washer machine?
Absolutely, and we can put some, we don't support one vendor over another vendor, but there are some some attachments you can put on that collect it so that you can prevent it from going in there. We'd love it to be made with the product itself, so that it's much more like the filters in our dryers, and there we're cleaning it out and keeping those materials out, and it doesn't have to be a aftermarket add-on, but there is some, and I can share some with you, and you can share it with the rest of the folks. And those also work well. It's just nice, since the technology's there, and it's actually really not that complicated, to be able to put it on and it just have it be a regular part of the manufacturing process.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any questions before we close out? Okay.
If you don't mind, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time. I know both of our topics are kind of dense, and I just want to thank you for listening to us as we went on, and know that all of us are here with any questions. I'm sorry to interrupt, by the way.
No, likewise. I was basically going to say that the exact thing. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Patrick, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say too.
No, just thank you. And looking forward to geeking out more with whoever wants to geek out later.
Awesome. Thanks everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.